before the world knew kingdoms, before the first city rose from the dust, before the first human carved symbols into clay. The earth was ruled by beings whose footsteps shook the dawn of time. Tonight, we begin a quiet journey into the last age of the Anunnaki, the ancient gods of old Mesopotamia, the ones who shaped land from chaos, the ones who authored destiny with their breath, the ones whose stories drift through the oldest tablets ever written. But this story does not begin with their glory. It begins with a silence, a slow, unsettling stillness that settled over the heavens long before the world realized something was ending. A whisper that moved like a soft wind through temples, through mountain homes, through the sacred halls where the gods once gathered. Humans felt it before they understood it. Priests sensed it in their dreams. Kings heard it in the tremble of oracles. And across the vast sky, the divine constellations of the gods seemed to dim, just slightly, as though a great cosmic breath was being drawn in and held. The age of the Anunnaki was approaching its final chapter, but endings never arrive loudly. They begin as gentle shifts, echoes that ripple quietly through the fabric of the world. So let us go back, far back, to the time when the gods still walked among humans, when temples were warm with incense and soft chanting, and when the bond between heaven and earth felt as real as the warm soil beneath one's feet. For in those days, the gods were not distant. They were present, in the river's flow, in the sky's changing color, in the whispering reeds along the Euphrates. They lived among the people of Sumer, guiding them, instructing them, and at times challenging them with divine storms or lessons of humility. But something was changing. The stillness over Eridu. Our story opens in Eridu, the oldest of the sacred cities, the home of Enki, the god of wisdom, water, and the deep places of the earth. It was said that Enki's presence could be felt in the coolness of the underground springs, in the way water bubbled gently from hidden channels, nourishing the first gardens tended by human hands. For generations, the people of Eridu woke each morning to the soft sound of water flowing beneath the temple, a sign that Enki watched over them. But on one quiet morning, the water fell strangely still. The priests sensed it first. The subtle tremor beneath the earth, the song of the springs, was silent. It wasn't dramatic, not frightening, just different. A calmness too calm, a breath held for too long. The chief priest, an old man who had served the temple for 50 seasons, knelt near the sacred pool. He lowered a hand into the water and felt a strange coolness, a stillness without life. He received no answer, only silence. This moment, gentle as it was, became the first sign that something was shifting in the realm of the gods, something unseen, something no human yet understood. And far above, in the invisible world where the Anunnaki held council, even the gods themselves felt the change. A gathering in the heavens. There, in the shimmering heights between stars and darkness, the Anunnaki convened in a chamber made not of stone, but of pure, glowing presence. A realm untouched by time. A place where thought shaped form, and where silence carried meanings deeper than words. Enlil, the great lord of air and authority, stood at the center. His presence was vast and commanding, yet even he felt a subtle unease. Beside him stood Ninhursag, the mother of mountains, her expression soft and knowing. And beyond them, gathered in a circle of pale light, stood the others. Anu, the sky father. Inanna, radiant with starlight. Utu, calm and bright as the sun. Nanna, gentle as the moon's reflection on water. They did not speak at first, for gods communicate in ways deeper than sound, in shared impressions, in ripples of awareness that move like currents through the fabric of creation. Something was fading, a tether between their world and the world of humans. a bond that had existed since the dawn of time. Anu was the first to break the silence. His voice, soft and slow as distant thunder, echoed through the luminous chamber. "The balance is shifting," he murmured. Enlil's gaze darkened. He had sensed it too, the growing independence of humankind, their ambitions, their desires, their expanding cities, their dreams that reached beyond the temples. Humans had once lived in complete harmony with the gods, but now they had begun to shape life on their own terms, not defiant, but unknowingly drifting from the path laid for them. Inanna stepped forward, her voice a whisper like wind passing through silk. "They no longer listen as they once did," she said gently. Ninhursag lowered her eyes. "It is the way of life to grow," she said softly. A soft, aching quiet filled the chamber. None of the gods wished for departure. None wished for the bond with humankind to weaken. But the world was changing, slowly, inevitably, as all things do. A world unaware. Far below, humanity continued living in peaceful ignorance of the divine unease. Farmers tended the soil, fishermen cast nets into winding rivers, children played in dusty courtyards, priests lit incense in quiet devotion. Life seemed unchanged. Yet beneath the surface, a subtle shift stirred, like a tide preparing to turn. Birds flew differently in the evenings. The winds paused longer between breaths. Dreams grew more vivid, filled with shapes and symbols that priests struggled to interpret. And in the temples, where gods once felt near, a soft emptiness began to linger, a gentle thinning of presence that whispered of things yet to come. The first dream. It was in this period of quiet change that a young temple scribe named Lucin received a dream unlike any he had ever known. He dreamed of a staircase of light stretching upward from the earth into the sky. At its peak stood a figure, tall, radiant, sorrowful. The figure lifted a hand, and the world beneath trembled softly. But the gesture was not one of destruction. It was one of farewell. When Lucin awoke, his heart felt heavy and yet filled with wonder. He wrote the dream in careful script, folded the tablet in cloth, and placed it in the temple archives, not realizing he had recorded one of the first human glimpses into the end of the Anunnaki Age. A soft, approaching ending. And so this is where our journey begins, not with thunder or battle, but with quietness. The gentle fading of a divine song that once echoed through the world. The gods had not left yet. Humans had not noticed the shift. Temples still glowed with devotion. But a great transformation was approaching, slow as the movement of stars, soft as a breath in the night. The age of the gods was beginning its long, gentle descent into memory. And humanity, without knowing it, was stepping into its own destiny. The days that followed the stillness in Eridu passed quietly, almost too quietly. To the people, life seemed unchanged. Markets still buzzed with gentle conversation, temples still rose proudly above the horizon, and the warm desert winds continued to sweep across ancient courtyards filled with clay jars, woven baskets, and the scent of incense. But beneath this familiar life, a delicate shift rippled through Sumer, a shift felt only by those who listened with their hearts rather than their ears. The connection between humans and gods, once vibrant and alive, was beginning to soften, like a thread slowly fraying at the edges. And though the change was subtle, it carried the weight of an ending long foretold in whispers older than writing itself. A fading presence in the temples. In the holy cities of Uruk, Ur, Lagash, and Eridu, temple priests rose each dawn to tend their shrines and call upon the gods with chants woven from centuries of devotion. At first they thought nothing of the silence. Sometimes the gods did not answer immediately. Sometimes their signs were soft, patient, gentle. But as the days stretched into weeks, something deeper became clear. The divine presence that had once filled their rituals had grown strangely thin, not gone, not absent, just distant, like a friend whose voice you hear from another room, faint and fading. One morning, the high priestess of Inanna stood at the entrance of her great temple, looking out across the awakening city of Uruk. She held a bowl of sacred oil in her hands, waiting for the light of dawn to reflect the blessing of the goddess. But the reflection that morning was pale and weak, not the radiant shimmer she had known all her life. No answer came, only the quiet hum of a city unaware that its gods were slowly stepping back from the world of mortals. The whisper that spread across the land. Across the entire Sumerian plain, from the fertile farmlands to the marshes near the Gulf, a gentle whisper passed through the hearts of certain people. It came not in words, but in a subtle feeling, a heaviness that settled behind the ribs, a strange longing, a sense that something precious was beginning to slip beyond human grasp. Farmers noticed it in the stillness of the fields. Shepherds felt it in the quiet spacing of their flocks. Mothers sensed it as they comforted their children at night, their lullabies drifting upward without the familiar warmth of divine presence settling over their homes. Dreams became more vivid. Some were comforting, some haunting. Many were confusing, filled with symbols that seemed to shimmer without meaning. But among them were a few that carried a deeper truth. Dreams of gods standing upon distant horizons facing away from the earth. Dreams of celestial gates slowly closing. Dreams of temples without shadows and skies without watchers. These dreams, scattered among thousands, became the second sign that the age of the Anunnaki was beginning its slow descent. The Council of the Gods, a growing dilemma. High above, in the realm where time softened and divine breath shaped reality, the Anunnaki gathered again. But this time, their luminous chamber felt different, as though the very light had dimmed around them. Enki stood with his gaze lowered, listening to the murmur of unseen waters that flowed through every layer of creation. Inanna paced softly, her radiant aura flickering like a candle struggling against a gentle wind. Enlil remained firm in posture, but even he seemed touched by contemplation. Anu, the elder of the heavens, spoke once more, his voice a soft vibration that calmed the space around him. "The humans grow strong," he said quietly. Ninhursag nodded slowly. "We shaped them with potential," she whispered. Enlil's expression tightened. "But growth brings imbalance." A silence stretched, gentle, but full of meaning. Enki lifted his eyes. They glimmered like water reflecting moonlight. "Their story is unfolding," he said softly. Inanna paused her pacing, her voice as delicate as drifting starlight. "They still call to us," she reminded them. Enki nodded. "Yes, their devotion remains." Anu's gaze turned downward, toward the earth shining faintly far below. "A time of separation approaches," he murmured, "not as punishment, not as abandonment." The council stood in reflective silence. Even gods could feel sorrow, not human sorrow, sharp and painful, but a deep, expansive melancholy felt across ages. For they knew that every creation must someday stand alone, and every age must gently make way for the next. Humans sensed the disturbance. Back on Earth, in bustling marketplaces and tranquil farmlands, humans began to feel a soft unease weaving through daily life. It was not fear, not grief, just an unfamiliar quietness, as though the world had exhaled and forgotten to breathe back in. Animals behaved differently. Dogs barked into empty air. Goats lifted their heads as if sensing an unseen presence passing overhead. In certain villages, children began pointing at the sky without knowing why. And in Eridu, young scribe Lucin, still troubled by his strange dream, sat beneath an ancient date palm and felt a gentle tremor in his chest. He could not explain it, but it felt as though something far above was shifting, slowly drifting away, like a lantern carried upward by warm night winds, glowing faintly, moving farther and farther from the touch of mortal hands. A meeting beneath the moon. That same night, a crescent moon hung low over Sumer, casting gentle silver reflections across the quiet surface of canals. In the courtyard of Eridu's temple, the old chief priest who had sensed the stillness of the sacred pool called his apprentices to gather. They stood in a circle as the night breeze brushed softly against their robes. The old priest spoke slowly, his voice tired but serene. "There is a change in the air," he said. The apprentices exchanged glances. One nodded timidly, another gazed upward, unsure why their heart felt so heavy. Silent shapes of worry moved across young faces, but the priest raised a gentle hand. "Do not fear," he whispered soothingly. "Endings are not always destruction." He stepped closer to the sacred pool, its surface still motionless, reflecting the moon like a flawless mirror. "Listen to the quiet," he said softly, and as the apprentices closed their eyes, allowing calmness to settle over them, the old priest felt it again, that faint, aching emptiness, as though the pool itself were waiting for a farewell. The first hint of departure. Far above, a shimmer passed across Inanna's aura, not a dimming, but a soft withdrawal, like a radiant being taking a small step backward from the world she had so lovingly nurtured. Enki turned his gaze toward the earthly waters. He saw villages sleeping in peace, children dreaming deeply, and temples glowing with gentle lamplight. He felt love for humanity, a love as deep as the primordial sea. But even love cannot hold a tide forever. The world was changing, humans were rising, and the gods had begun the first slow motions of their departure, not out of anger, not out of neglect, but because the universe itself was turning another page. A new age was approaching, quietly, gracefully, just like a dawn that first appears as a pale whisper of light on the edge of night. And soon, humans would awaken to a world where the presence of gods felt just a little farther away. Nights grew longer across Sumer, not in hours, but in feeling, as though each evening carried a quiet, shimmering curtain that settled gently across the land, inviting deeper dreams and deeper questions. The people did not know that the gods were stepping back from the world, but their dreams began whispering truths that waking minds could not yet understand. Across cities and small villages, visions drifted through the sleeping hearts of humankind. Visions soft as mist, faint as moonlight on still water. Some dreamed of distant mountains glowing with pale blue light. Others dreamed of great winged beings standing silently beside rivers, their forms shimmering like heat rising from stone. A few dreamed of stars that flickered gently, as though bowing farewell before slipping into the night. These dreams carried no fear, only a deep, echoing sadness, a sense of something precious slowly drifting away. And among these dreamers was Lucin, the young scribe of Eridu, whose first dream had already unsettled the quiet corners of his heart. Lucin's second dream. On the third night after the meeting beneath the moon, Lucin fell asleep with a clay tablet resting near his pillow, a habit he had developed to capture any dream he believed came from the gods. As he drifted into sleep, the walls of his small chamber softened, the world dissolved, and a gentle, blue-tinted darkness rose around him like water. He found himself standing on a vast, glowing plain. The ground beneath his feet shimmered like glass, reflecting a sky filled with distant auroras stretching in silent waves. In the far distance, a figure appeared, the same figure from his first dream, tall, radiant, sorrowful. But this time, as the figure raised its hand, Lucin felt a warm breeze brush softly against his cheek. It carried a whisper, so quiet, so delicate, that he almost wondered if it was only the echo of his own heartbeat. The separation begins. Then the vision faded, slowly, gently, like dawn dissolving into daylight. When Lucin awoke, his chest felt both heavy and full. He reached for his clay tablet and carved the dream with trembling hands, but he did not show anyone, not yet. The dream felt too deep, too intimate, as though it were meant only for him until he understood its meaning. The priests began to worry. In Eridu, the old chief priest continued to observe the strange behavior of the sacred pool. Its stillness persisted. The gentle song of its waters, once steady and comforting, remained quiet. He spent many hours alone in the inner chamber, kneeling before the pool, listening with closed eyes for any sign or whisper from Enki. Yet day after day, the silence deepened. One morning, while the city outside bustled with life, the priest leaned over the water and whispered into its depths. His voice echoed softly against the stone walls, but the water gave no reply. He knew then what he had hoped not to admit: the presence of his God, the guiding current of his entire life, was fading. Not gone, but withdrawing, softly, like a tide pulling gently away from the shore. Whispers spread across the temples. In Uruk, the priestesses of Inanna noticed that the morning star, Inanna's sacred symbol, seemed dimmer some days. Not in a way visible to the ordinary eye, but in a way felt deep within the heart. Their songs at dawn felt as though they reached a little less far into the sky. In Nippur, Enlil's priests spoke of strange winds blowing through the ziggurat at night, winds that carried no sand, no scent, only a cold, gentle emptiness. In Ur, the moon god. Nanna's temple fell quieter during the sacred hours. The silver bowl of water used to reflect the moon shimmered less brightly, as if the moonlight itself were hesitant to descend. Across the land, the faithful sensed it. The gods were watching more quietly, intervening less, responding with softer echoes. Some feared divine displeasure. Others believed it was the calm before revival. But the wisest among them felt something else: a transition, a slow turning of a cosmic age. The gods reflect on humanity. In the celestial realm, Enki's gaze softened as he watched the people of Eridu move through their days. They laughed, worked, prayed, and cared for one another, much as they always had. But something had changed. The humans no longer waited for divine instruction before building their homes or shaping their laws. They created on their own. They solved problems. They debated. They innovated. Humanity was becoming a story that could stand, even without a god guiding every step. A quiet pride rippled through Enki's presence, but beneath it was a gentle sadness, a feeling like watching a child walk into adulthood, knowing they must one day leave the shelter of home. Inanna, ever sensitive to the emotions of mortals, felt the same. "Their hearts still call to us," she whispered to the shimmering chamber of gods, and Lil watched the mortal world with a furrowed brow. "They move too boldly," he murmured. But Ninhursag placed a calming hand upon his shimmering arm. "They do not forget," she said softly. A long, contemplative quiet flowed through the divine council. They were creators, but they were also caretakers, and caretakers must one day understand when their presence limits the growth of the ones they protect. Signs in the sky. As nights passed, the sky over Sumer began to change. Stars flickered with strange rhythms. Some constellations shimmered faintly, as though viewed through water. Priests observed that certain omens, patterns of birds, shifts of wind, movements of planets, no longer matched the cycles recorded on ancient tablets. It was as if the universe itself was rearranging its subtle language. One evening, a pale arc of light swept gently across the horizon. It was not a comet nor a meteor, but something softer, a graceful veil that glided across the sky and dissolved into the night. People stared upward, captivated. No one knew its meaning, but the gods did. It was the first celestial ripple marking the beginning of their gentle withdrawal. Not an exile, not a punishment, but the opening of a new cosmic doorway. The scribe and the oracle. In Eridu, A respected oracle known for her calm visions requested to meet Lucin. She had dreamed of a young man with a tablet covered in moonlight, and she believed he carried a message meant to be heard. When Lucin arrived at her quiet chamber, the oracle greeted him with a warm, slow nod. "Sit," she whispered, her voice like soft wind passing through reeds. Lucine sat carefully. Her tone carried no fear, only patient curiosity. Lucine hesitated. The dreams had been so personal, so vivid, so heavy. But something in the oracle's eyes invited honesty. Slowly he told her everything. The glowing plain, the sorrowful radiant figure, the whisper of separation. When he finished, the oracle closed her eyes and inhaled deeply. A long moment passed. Finally, she opened her eyes and spoke with quiet certainty. Lucin's breath caught. The oracle raised a gentle hand. "Not today," she said softly. "Not tomorrow, but soon, in the language of gods." Her words fell like soft petals into the stillness of the room. And then she added, "Your dreams will guide us. Do not fear them." Lucin bowed his head, his heart fluttering with a quiet mixture of awe and sorrow. The quiet. Before the next sign. As the sun set over Sumer, casting long golden rays across the rooftops and temple towers, a gentle calm settled over the land. Families prepared evening meals, the scent of bread rising softly through courtyards. Priests lit lamps in sacred halls. Children fell asleep in the warm arms of their mothers. Everything seemed peaceful. Everything seemed ordinary. But far above, in realms unseen, a slow, inevitable transition was unfolding. The Anunnaki were preparing for the next step in their long departure, a step that would soon echo softly through the dreams and hearts of all humankind. As weeks passed across ancient Sumer, a quiet transformation unfolded that few could name, yet many could feel. It was not a sudden darkness nor a frightening omen. Instead, the world seemed wrapped in a delicate, pale haze, as if the divine light that once flowed freely into the land had softened its glow. The mornings felt slightly dimmer, the evenings a bit quieter. Even the sun, steady as ever, seemed to shine with a gentler warmth, a serene light that carried a faint whisper of distance. To the ordinary farmer or shepherd, life continued as always. But those who tended the temples, those who listened for the heartbeat of heaven, felt an unmistakable shift. Something was withdrawing, not coldly, not abruptly, but gracefully, like a hand releasing its hold after a long and gentle touch. A change in Inanna's temple. In the great city of Uruk, the temple of Inanna had always radiated with brilliance. Her presence, like starlight woven into human form, could be felt in every ritual, every chant, every shimmering lamp that burned beneath her towering ziggurat. But recently the priestesses began noticing a quiet dimming. Their dawn hymns, once met with a warm electric hum of divine response, now drifted upward without echo. Their sacred incense, made from rare resins carried across deserts, no longer swirled toward the heavens with its usual vibrant motion. Instead, it lingered lazily in the air like mist without wind. One morning, the high priestess of Inanna stood at the top of the temple steps, watching the horizon blush with first light. She held a silver bowl of oil, a ritual offering made at the birth of every dawn. But today, as the sun climbed the sky, the oil reflected only a faint shimmer. A soft sadness settled over her. The wind answered with only a quiet sigh. The strange stillness in Enki's waters. Meanwhile, in Eridu, the sacred pool of Enki remained unnervingly calm. Water, by nature, moves. It ripples. It vibrates with life. It responds to the smallest whisper of wind. But the waters of the temple were still as polished stone. The old chief priest visited the pool each morning and each evening, touching the water with gentle reverence. But day after day, the silence grew deeper. He sensed a truth he had resisted acknowledging. Enki's spirit, though still present, was fading from the physical world. not in abandonment, but in preparation for departure. The priest knelt and rested his forehead against the cool stone beside the water. His voice trembled not with fear, but with love. For a god withdrawing is not a punishment, it is an ending of a sacred chapter. Enlil observes from the winds. Across Sumer, winds began carrying a different kind of message. Enlil, the lord of air and authority, felt the deepening shift in every breath that moved across the plains. He saw the priests gazing anxiously into the sky. He saw people making offerings with renewed fervor, as though trying to restore a connection they could not name. Enlil's presence still rested in the winds, soft, powerful, guiding the rhythms of storms and seasons. But like the others, his essence grew subtly distant. Where once his influence moved like a warm pulse through the world, it now drifted like a fading echo, not gone, but receding, slowly, gently, inevitably. In the celestial realm, Enlil watched humanity with contemplative eyes. "They still look to us," he murmured. Ninhursag responded in her soft, earthy voice. "That has always been their nature." Enlil closed his eyes and allowed a long, slow breath to ripple through his being. He knew she was right. A quiet sign in the night sky. One night, a small group of astronomers in the city of Ur stood atop their ziggurat, studying the stars as they had done every night of their adult lives. They recorded the paths of constellations, the movements of the moon, and the subtle dances of the planets. But that night, something unusual occurred. A cluster of stars on the eastern horizon dimmed, not suddenly, but with a soft, melancholic fade, as though their light bowed in respect before slipping gently from the sky. The astronomers watched in silent awe as the dimming spread across a small arc of heaven. The elder astronomer placed a calming hand on his shoulder. "Do not fear, child." But as the stars faded, the elder felt a weight in his chest. He had studied the sky for over 50 years. He knew its rhythms, its patterns, its gentle changes. And this was not a simple shift. This was something else, something deeper, something ancient, something divine. The scribes begin to compare dreams. In Eridu, Lucine was not alone. Others across Sumer began recording their dreams. A potter's wife dreamed of a river flowing backward toward the mountains, carrying shimmering shapes upstream toward the heavens. A shepherd on the outskirts of Lagash dreamed of a massive gate in the sky closing slowly, its edges glowing with pale light. Scribes started comparing notes, meeting quietly at dusk in half-lit rooms. The symbols appeared different in each dream, but the meaning felt the same. A farewell was beginning, a soft one, a peaceful one, but a farewell nonetheless. The gods discussed their next step. In the celestial chamber, the Anunnaki gathered once more. The glow around them seemed fainter, as though a tide of divine light had receded slightly from the edges of existence. Anu spoke first. Inanna's soft radiance pulsed gently. "Their dreams touch the edges of truth," she murmured. Enki's voice was calm and full of depth. "They will not understand the full meaning of our departure." Enlil looked downward, his presence heavy with reflection. A serene quiet settled within the chamber. The gods were not leaving out of anger or disappointment. They were leaving because destiny was calling them to another realm, another purpose, another phase of cosmic design. And humanity, born from divine intention, was ready, even if they did not know it. The softening grows stronger. In the days that followed, the soft dimming of divine presence became more pronounced. Flames in temple lamps burned lower. Sacred statues felt colder to the touch. Priests noticed that offerings placed before the gods remained untouched by the usual subtle signs. A shifting shadow, a stirring flame, a gentle breeze. Yet nothing frightening occurred. No plagues, no storms, no curses. only calm withdrawal, a soft vanishing, like mist fading at sunrise. People still prayed, they still honored the gods with devotion, but now their prayers echoed through a space growing quietly hollow, a place where the gods still listened but no longer answered as they once did. And so the stage was set. The separation had truly begun, softly, peacefully, unavoidably. The age of the Anunnaki was taking its first gentle, irreversible steps toward its end. As the days slipped into weeks and the weeks into quiet moons, the soft dimming of the divine presence continued its gentle, almost unnoticeable retreat from the world. No thunder announced it. No dark omen warned of it. No disaster revealed its cause. The gods were not vanishing with violence or wrath. They were stepping back in the most peaceful way imaginable, as though the sacred breath that once filled the world was being drawn slowly inward, inhaled by the heavens as the cosmic tide shifted. To the people of Sumer, life still moved with the ancient rhythms, the plow cutting earth, the river carrying its silt, the stars marking time in the night sky. But those who were sensitive, those whose hearts listened to places beyond sound, felt a change as intimate as the pause between two breaths. The sacred breath of the gods was retreating. The lamps of Uruk burn differently. In the great city of Uruk, the priestesses lit their evening lamps in the towering temple of Inanna. These lamps were crafted with care, filled with fragrant oils, their flames dancing gently in response to the goddess's presence. But now the flames trembled with a strange fragility. Their glow seemed thin, as though reaching upward toward something that had moved just a little farther away. The high priestess, a woman whose devotion stretched over 4 decades, stood in the center of the sacred hall. She watched the flickering light reflect across polished stone walls and felt a deep, aching tenderness. It was not fear, it was not grief. It was the quiet sorrow of knowing that something beloved, something she had felt since girlhood, was slipping gently beyond reach. Her voice carried a steady calm, yet beneath it lay a tremor only she could feel. The silent wind over Nippur. In the holy city of Nippur, the temple of Enlil stood strong against the desert winds. Its terraces climbed the sky like steps carved for gods. For generations, priests had listened for Enlil's presence in every whisper of the wind. But now the wind blew differently. Its sound was softer, its rhythm slower, its voice subdued. It no longer arrived with the full authority of the storm lord. It drifted like a memory, gentle, faint, like a song nearly forgotten. The priest of Enlil stood atop the ziggurat, letting the softened wind brush against his robe. He closed his eyes and listened intently, hoping for that familiar pulse that once filled his heart with strength. But the wind answered with only silence. He bowed his head. It was not a farewell, not yet, but it was the beginning of acceptance. The waters of Eridu grow colder. In Eridu, the sacred pool of Enki grew colder each night. The water, once warm with divine presence, now felt like the stillness left behind by a departing tide. The old chief priest continued his twice-daily vigil, touching the water with steady hands. Each time the chill reached deeper into his bones, not painfully but unmistakably. He spoke softly to the pool, his words rippling faintly across the unmoving surface. Your wisdom shaped us. Your waters made us. The silence that followed felt sacred, like the quiet between verses of an eternal hymn. The quiet spread of unease in the people. Across Sumer, the people sensed a change they could not articulate. Mothers noticed their infants gazing upward at nothing at all, as if watching something unseen pass gently across the sky. Farmers found their crops growing a bit slower, though the soil remained rich. Shepherds reported that flocks moved differently, pausing often to stare toward the horizon. Merchants whispered that the usual blessings over their caravans felt lighter, as though spoken into a thinning veil. No one felt danger, no one felt curse, No one felt punishment. What they felt was absence, soft, gradual, almost polite, a tender emptiness settling into the corners of everyday life. Lucin begins his record of the signs. The young scribe Lucin, haunted by his dreams and moved by the oracle's words, began documenting the subtle shifts he observed. He wrote not with fear, but with reverence, as though recording the final notes of a beautiful song. On a quiet morning in the temple's archive chamber, he inscribed carefully, "The gods still walk with us, but their footsteps grow lighter each day." His hands shook slightly as he wrote, not from anxiety, but from awe, for he sensed that he was witnessing something no mortal before him had ever seen, the soft, sacred withdrawal of the divine. The gods feel the weight of transition. In the celestial realm, the glow around the Anunnaki continued to soften. They were not fading in power. Their essence remained vast and eternal. But the connection that tied them to the world of humans was loosening, strand by strand. Inanna stood gazing downward, her luminous eyes filled with quiet emotion. "Their hearts call to us still," she whispered. Enki placed a gentle presence beside her. "The river of time flows where it must," he said softly. "We guided its course at the beginning." Enlil, ever conflicted, felt a heaviness like twilight pressing against the horizon. "We were their strength," he murmured, "their wisdom." Ninhursag spoke with compassion. "And we remain their memory, their beginning." The divine chamber filled with a soft hum, a resonance of unspoken understanding. The gods knew what came next. The separation would deepen, and with it would arise the first true signs that their era was approaching its gentle close. The first subtle omens of departure. And so the world began to experience small but undeniable omens, not frightening ones, not destructive ones, but quiet shifts that echoed the soft withdrawal of sacred presence. Flowers sacred to Ninhursag bloomed 2 days later than usual. Inanna's morning star trembled faintly in dawn's early light. Enlil's winds carried a new stillness, a contemplative hush. Enki's streams flowed a little slower, as though waiting for a command that no longer came. These signs were gentle, reverent, almost ceremonial, as if the world itself was honoring the gods with a peaceful transition. The people grow quiet. As these omens spread, the people of Sumer began to grow quiet in a way that mirrored the heavens. Conversations softened, rituals became more contemplative. Families gathered together in the evenings, sharing stories of times when the gods felt closer, warmer, more present. A deep serenity fell over the land, a calmness tinged with mystery. It was the calm before understanding, the calm before acceptance, the calm before farewell. The breath between worlds. And so, in this chapter of our story, the sacred breath of the gods draws farther inward. The connection remains, thin, soft, like a silken thread stretching across a great distance. But the world can feel it, the beginning of the great separation, the beginning of the ending of the Anunnaki Age, soft as moonlight, quiet as drifting sand, gentle as a final blessing given in silence, a farewell that has only just begun. As the gentle withdrawal of divine presence continued, the sacred cities of Sumer began to echo with a new kind of quietness. It was not the silence of abandonment, not the silence of loss, but a contemplative silence, a stillness that seemed to rise from the very stones beneath the cities. Life continued as it always had. Children played, farmers toiled, merchants bartered. Yet beneath these ordinary rhythms, a soft whisper pulsed through the heart of the land, a whisper from deep underground, from ancient foundations laid during the dawn of humanity. The great cities themselves seemed to sense the shifting winds of destiny. Eridu, the first city, feels the first echo. Eridu, the oldest of all, built where the first waters once rose to meet the first gardens of humankind, felt the change most profoundly. The Temple of Enki had always been a place of flowing sound, the trickle of sacred springs, the murmur of priests, the hum of ritual. But now, a new sound emerged, not loud, not alarming, just a subtle resonance like a low vibration that trembled softly through the ancient stones. The old chief priest felt it beneath his feet as he walked through the hall before dawn prayers. He paused, rested a hand against the wall, and closed his tired eyes. A faint echo met him, a hum that was neither earthly nor divine, but something in between. "The foundations remember," he whispered to himself. He did not know exactly what they remembered, but he felt a truth as deep as the roots of mountains. The city sensed the beginning of the gods' departure. Old places, ancient places, built in the time when God stepped freely upon the earth, held memories in their stone and clay. And now, those memories stirred. Uruk, the heartbeat beneath Inanna's temple. In Uruk, the grand ziggurat of Inanna towered above the city like a mountain shaped by hands of devotion. It was said that the temple's foundations were older than the city itself, laid during an age when gods and humans shared the same sunlight. One night, the high priestess awoke suddenly, her heart pounding with a strange awareness. The temple was silent. No wind, no footsteps, no flickering lamps. Yet she felt a quiet tremor beneath her mat, a subtle pulse as if the earth itself were breathing slower. Or waiting. She rose, wrapped her shawl softly around her shoulders, and ascended the stone steps to the highest terrace of the ziggurat. From there, the city of Uruk stretched below her like a sleeping creature, its lights dim, its streets empty, its heart calm. She knelt at the altar and pressed her palm against the warm stone. There, beneath the altar, she felt it again. A pulse, a gentle, rhythmic echo, a resonance so soft it was almost a memory rather than a sound. It reminded her of Inanna's presence, not the brilliant radiance that had once filled her rituals, but a soft, fading glow, like a lantern carried down a long corridor, its light drifting farther with each gentle step. The stars above shimmered in delicate silence. Nippur, the voice beneath the winds. Nippur had always been the spiritual center of Sumer, home to the authority of Enlil and the sacred order of heaven. Priests believed that the city itself was built on holy ground, a meeting point between earth and sky. As the divine presence softened, the winds around Nippur grew strangely quiet. One morning, a young priest named Etana stood on the upper terrace of the great temple and listened as hard as he could. But the wind refused to speak. No whisper, no sigh, no echo. He knelt, pressing his ear to the cold stone, hoping to hear the voice of the storm lord that had guided him since childhood. At first there was nothing. Then a faint vibration moved through the stone, steady, soft, deep. Not the commanding voice of Enlil, but a gentle echo, a farewell echo. Etana breathed deeply, his eyes stinging with emotion. "You are leaving us," he whispered. The stone remained warm, as though holding the last traces of a departing presence. Lagash, a temple. Dreaming of the past. In Lagash, the priests of Ningirsu noticed that their sacred lions, stone guardians carved centuries earlier, seemed different. Not physically, not visibly. But when the priests brushed the dust from their carvings, the stone felt colder, heavier, as though the spirit that once animated them had stepped back. One evening, an elder priest sat beside the lion statue and traced its ancient patterns. He closed his eyes and let his thoughts drift. A memory surfaced, of a time decades earlier, when he had witnessed a shimmering presence move through the temple, a presence so profound it made the air itself thicken with awe. That presence was now only a faint residue, a quiet echo held in the stone. Temples dream, he realized. They dream of divine ages, and in their dreaming, they feel the ending before humans do. Lucin receives a message from below. Back in Eridu, young scribe Lucin sat in the archive chamber, surrounded by thousands of clay tablets. He had spent days reading ancient records, rituals, omens, royal decrees, myths of creation. Yet now, as he traced the signs on a weathered tablet, he felt something strange, a vibration, very faint, very low. He placed the tablet down and touched the floor. The echo grew stronger, not threatening, not alarming, just present, a soft, steady pulse beneath the foundations of the temple. In that moment, Lucin felt something warm move through his chest, not a vision, not a dream, but a feeling. The gods were preparing to shift their realm, and the earth, the cities, the stone foundations felt the movement of the divine, like a great tree pulling its roots from soil it had lived in for ages. The gods were withdrawing their presence from the physical world, not suddenly, not sharply, but with the patience of eternity. The cities grow quiet. Together, as these echoes rose quietly beneath temples, shrines, and ancient courtyards, the entire land seemed to drift into a shared hush. The people carried on with their daily tasks. Children still laughed, rivers still flowed, markets still bustled. But a new stillness settled around them, gentle, warm, almost protective, a stillness that signaled the passage between ages. The gods were stepping back, and the cities, the first homes of divine and human unity, were the first witnesses. Their stones remembered the beginning, and now those same stones felt the beginning of the end. Not a tragic end, not a violent end, but a graceful closing of a sacred era. The end of the Anunnaki Age was unfolding like a slow sunset, beautiful, melancholic, and filled with quiet wonder. As the soft withdrawal of divine presence deepened, the dreams of humankind began to shift. They grew quieter, gentler, but filled with a kind of symbolism that wrapped the sleeping mind like a veil. It was as though the world of dreams had become a meeting ground, a place where gods and mortals could still brush past one another in fleeting glimmers of light. People across Sumer found themselves waking with a sense of longing, as if they had spoken with someone important yet distant, someone whose presence faded as morning light touched the horizon. These dreams did not frighten. They did not command. They did not warn with thunder. They whispered soft warnings, soft farewells, soft guidance for a world about to change. The Shepherd's Dream. Outside the city of Lagash, a shepherd named Mili fell asleep under the stars while tending his flock. That night, he dreamed of a vast meadow lit by a soft golden glow. In the distance, a figure walked toward him, a tall being, glimmering with gentle radiance, face blurred like a memory. The figure knelt beside him and placed a hand upon his shoulder. The voice that followed was calm, slow, deep as distant water. "Tend to what grows," the figure whispered. When Meli woke, his eyes were wet, though the dream had brought no sorrow. He did not understand the message, but he felt a strange peace, as though the world was preparing for something tender and inevitable. The potter's wife sees the skin empty. In the city of a potter's wife named Sarala dreamed she stood beside the sacred moon temple. Above her, the sky glowed at midnight, full of familiar stars woven into constellations she had known since girlhood. Then slowly, one by one, the stars began to fade. Not vanish, fade. Their light grew thinner, their edges softer, until they resembled tiny breaths exhaled into darkness. Sarala looked upward as the last of the stars dimmed gently, leaving the sky quiet, peaceful, empty. A voice, neither male nor female, whispered across the dream, "Do not fear emptiness." He smiled, not understanding, but Sarala knew that something sacred was drifting away. Lucin's third dream. The path of departure. Among all dreamers, Lucian's visions remained the clearest, and on a quiet night, when the moon hung low and the winds barely touched the palm leaves outside his window, he encountered his third dream. He found himself walking across a shoreline where waves glowed with ethereal light. The ocean stretched endlessly, its surface shimmering with soft golden hues like threads of woven dawn. In the far distance, he saw them, figures of immense height, their forms radiant but blurred with serenity. The Anunnaki. They walked not toward him, but away from him, their footsteps leaving faint ripples in the glowing water. As they moved, they did not look back, not out of coldness, but out of acceptance, as if they knew the time for sharing paths had come to a gentle close. Lucian tried to call out, but his voice vanished into the dreamscape. Then one figure paused. It turned slightly, just enough to acknowledge his presence. The voice that reached him was barely a whisper. "You will witness the transition." Then the figure joined the others and continued walking toward a distant horizon that glowed brighter with each step they took. Lucian awoke with tears in his eyes and breath unsteady, overwhelmed not by fear, but by the profound beauty and sadness of the dream. He took a fresh tablet and began to write. The Oracle interprets the dreams. The next morning, Lucian carried the tablet to the Oracle of Eridu, the woman whose wisdom ripened like ancient fruit. She read the inscription in silence, running her fingers over the clay's soft edges. Her eyes closed briefly as if listening to something far away. Lucian swallowed gently. His voice trembled. The Oracle's gaze softened. "Not in the way mortals understand leaving," she said quietly. Lucian lowered his head. The Oracle touched his shoulder with a hand that carried decades of sacred insight. She smiled faintly. "This is not abandonment. The priests across Sumer share their visions." News of strange dreams spread quietly among priests and priestesses throughout the land. They gathered discreetly in temple courtyards at dusk, sharing symbols and visions in soft, cautious tones. One priest saw a great chariot of light ascending the sky at a slow, deliberate pace. Another dreamed of a tree whose branches once touched the heavens, now slowly withdrawing into the earth. A young temple singer dreamed of a beautiful voice fading into silence as though carried away by a gentle wind. None of these dreams brought terror. They brought a soft aching, a sacred melancholy, a sense that something ancient and beloved was closing its chapter with grace. Some priests believed the gods were dying. Others believed the gods were lifting the veil between realms for reasons mortals could not comprehend. But the wisest understood the truth. The gods were transitioning. The structure of the cosmos was shifting, and dreams were the final bridge between divine intention and mortal awareness. The children begin to dream together. One of the most curious signs occurred among children. In several villages, children reported remarkably similar dreams, even though they had never met, never spoken, never shared stories. They dreamed of a tall gate made of soft white glow. They dreamed of figures passing through it, one by one. They dreamed of warmth, of serenity, of farewells. The mother felt a chill run through her heart. A chill not of fear, but of awe. For children often see truths that adults have forgotten how to perceive. Even the animals feel the change. Animals across the land began displaying unusual behavior. Cattle paused mid-graze to stare at the sky. Goats gathered quietly at dawn and dusk as though waiting for something unseen. Birds flew in new patterns, slow spirals, smooth arches, before disappearing toward distant horizons. Temple's cats, normally restless, sat still for long periods with their eyes fixed on seemingly empty space, their tails twitching as if sensing a presence humans could no longer detect. The old priest of Nippur watched these signs with calm understanding. "All creatures feel the shifting breath of heaven," he murmured, the soft warning of the dream realm. And so, as the gods continued their gentle withdrawal, the dream realm, the quiet place where the mortal heart touches the eternal, became the final channel through which heaven spoke to earth. The dreams were not commands, not threats, not prophecies of destruction. They were warnings, wrapped in kindness, whispers, wrapped in love, farewells, wrapped in peace. The gods were leaving, slowly, softly, with grace. And through dreams, humanity began to understand. Not fully, not clearly, but enough to sense that the world was approaching the edge of an age. The end of the Anunnaki Age was drawing nearer, quiet as moonlight, gentle as falling dust, soft as a final embrace between old friends. And this understanding was only the beginning. In the gentle quiet that settled across the land of Sumer, the world itself seemed to move with slower rhythms, as if each sunrise drifted upward with more hesitation and each sunset lingered a little longer before surrendering the sky to the soft embrace of night. Everything felt slightly stretched, slightly elongated, as though time was no longer measured by the usual beat of human footsteps or river currents, but instead by the distant, retreating cadence of divine beings whose presence once shaped the very flow of existence. The gods were not gone, but their footsteps, once firm, warm, and unmistakably near, were fading into a far horizon that human senses could barely perceive. It was in this delicate period of quiet transition that the world began to experience a deeper and more profound stillness, one that wrapped itself around the temples, the fields, the rooftops, and the silent chambers of those who watched the heavens with wondering hearts. A soft dimness falls over the sacred temples. In the holy cities, where towering ziggurats reached upward like carved mountains, the sacred halls began to feel as though they held echoes rather than voices. Priests who had spent decades listening for the gentle hum of divine presence now found themselves standing in sanctuaries filled with a softer light, a light that seemed to fall through the air like dust drifting peacefully in a golden beam before dissolving into stillness. One priest in Nippur, known for his unwavering devotion to Enlil, stood alone beside a high window overlooking the vast plains beyond the city. He remembered the way the winds once roared during certain rituals, how the great god of air would make his presence known through swirling gusts and trembling shadows that danced across the stone floors. But now, the wind felt like a sigh, long, slow, and filled with a sadness so tender that the priest could not help but lower his head in reverence to the changing era. The waters speak their final echoes. In Eridu, the waters of Enki grew cold and calm, their once vibrant ripples now barely visible beneath the pale shimmer of morning light. The chief priest, whose entire life had been shaped by the wisdom and presence of the god of the deep waters, sat beside the sacred pool as dawn approached. He placed both hands on the ancient stones, closed his eyes, and took a slow breath that trembled at its edges. He felt, not through touch, but through the quiet knowing held deep in his spirit, that Enki was drawing inward, retreating gently from the physical world into a realm of profound, unreachable stillness. A faint echo pulsed through the water, so soft it could not be heard, only felt. It was like the final ripple from a distant pebble that had long ago touched the surface. And with this echo came a realization, one that unfolded slowly in his heart, like the petals of a flower opening for the last time. The gods were not returning to heaven. They were becoming part of something far greater and deeper than heaven itself. The people feel the distance. Growing. Across the land, ordinary people began to sense that something vast and incomprehensible was slowly shifting beyond the boundaries of their daily lives. Farmers paused in the fields without knowing why, their eyes drifting toward the horizon as though trying to catch sight of something just outside the visible world. Mothers hummed lullabies that felt strangely heavy in their chests, as if the melodies carried a memory they did not know they possessed. Children pointed to the sky, and whispered that the beings of light were walking farther away, their shapes becoming smaller, their glow dimmer, their path stretching toward a place that felt both peaceful and unreachable. Even the elders, who had spent a lifetime learning the signs and symbols of divine presence, felt the subtle ache of a bond being stretched thin, not torn, not broken, but softened until it trembled like a fine thread pulled between two worlds. Lucen feels the weight of his calling. In Eridu, Lucen sat beneath the shade of an olive tree, with his tablets spread before him. The breeze was warm but strangely hollow, carrying hints of a silence larger than anything he had ever known. The dreams had grown stronger, more vivid, more laden with meaning. He felt them not as visions from the imagination, but as messages delivered through a delicate veil that separated mortals from the realm of divinity. He lifted his stylus, but hesitated. He understood now that he was recording not simply dreams, not merely omens, but the unfolding transition between the age of gods and the age of humankind. As the stylus scratched across the clay surface, Lucen felt tears forming beneath his lashes, not from fear, but from the overwhelming beauty of witnessing something so vast, so ancient, so delicate. A meeting of priests and scribes. As the signs grew clearer, the priests of the major cities came together for a rare gathering, not in a single place, but in spirit, each standing atop their own ziggurat at the same moment under the same sky. They performed a synchronized ritual that had not been practiced for generations, a ritual designed to honor the presence of the gods in every corner of the land. But as their voices rose in long melodic chants, the heavens remained still, quiet, peaceful. The gods no longer replied as they once had, but the priests felt a gentle warmth settle across their hearts. A silent blessing, a final acknowledgement, a farewell carried on invisible winds. The priests understood then that the gods were not deserting them. The gods were rising to a realm from which they would no longer intervene, but from which they would forever watch. The gods themselves. Feel the distance. High above, in the shimmering expanse where divine essence gathers like galaxies woven from thought, the Anunnaki stood together, watching the human world with expressions soft as fading starlight. And with those words the gods understood that their path was set, their age was ending, and the world of men was preparing to step into its own dawn. Their footsteps continued to fade, slowly, softly, beautifully, as they walked toward a horizon no mortal could see. There are moments in history so quiet, so delicately woven into the fabric of time, that even those who live through them do not immediately realize how profoundly their world is changing. The fading of the Anunnaki's presence was one of those moments, a shift so gentle that it felt less like the closing of an age and more like a soft veil being drawn slowly across the sky. As the gods stepped deeper into the realm beyond human sight, their divine light, once bright enough to guide kings and bend the winds of fate, began to lift softly from the cities and temples built in their honor. It did not vanish, nor did it dim all at once. Instead, it rose gradually, like the morning mist that drifts upward as the sun warms the earth, until it becomes part of the sky itself. The glow over Uruk softens. In Uruk, where Inanna's temple once shone with a vibrancy that lit the very stones beneath it, a subtle change was unfolding. The glow that radiated from the sacred chambers, a glow unconnected to fire or oil, but to the living presence of the goddess, began to thin, as though its brilliance were being gently gathered into invisible hands. Priestesses noticed it first as they performed the dawn rites. The chamber no longer pulsed with that familiar warmth that wrapped itself around their hearts like a comforting embrace. Instead, the light felt stretched, softened, diffused, as if it were slowly preparing to drift upward into a higher realm. The high priestess, who had spent the night in contemplative meditation, stood before the great statue of Inanna. and felt the quiet shift deep within her soul. A tear gathered at the corner of her eye, not from grief, but from the profound beauty of knowing she was witnessing the closing of a divine era. In Nippur, the winds forget their song. In Nippur, the winds that once carried signs of Enlil's presence now moved through the city with a strange, dreamlike softness. They no longer arrived with the weight of divine authority. They drifted instead like wandering spirits, gentle, unfocused, as if unsure which paths they were meant to travel. Priests stood on the terraces and raised their arms to the sky, performing rituals that had shaped their lives for as long as they could remember. But the winds that answered were faint echoes of the storms that once roared with Enlil's command. One elder priest, a man whose hair had whitened under decades of service, listened to the muted currents as though they were a fading heartbeat. The wind touched his face, warm, gentle, and strangely final, before drifting away into a quiet that settled over Nippur like a soft blanket. Enki's waters reflect a fading glow. Meanwhile, in the city of Eridu, Enki's sacred waters mirrored the soft withdrawal of divine presence. The once shimmering pool, alive with ripples that responded to the slightest whisper, had become a still mirror reflecting the ceiling of the temple with a clarity so perfect it seemed almost unreal. The chief priest, who visited the pool every dawn, noticed how the light upon its surface looked different now, less vibrant, less alive, as though the glow that once rose from the depths below had retreated into a place beyond reach. He placed his hand into the cool water and felt nothing but silence, not an empty silence, but a sacred one, like the stillness found in the deepest chambers of the earth. His heart trembled, but he nodded slowly, accepting what he had known for many moons. Enki was withdrawing, not abandoning, withdrawing, gentle as the tide that recedes from the shore to merge with the vastness of the open sea. The heavens themselves begin to shift. Night after night, the skies over Sumer reflected the slow lifting of divine light. Constellations that had once seemed fixed now shimmered with subtle fluctuations. Some drifted slightly from their ancient positions, as if the celestial order was adjusting itself to the new cosmic arrangement. Astronomers noticed that the brightest stars connected to the divine myths began to fade a little earlier than expected. Not vanish, just fade. As if the heavens were gently dimming the lamps of a grand hall after a long ceremony. One young astronomer recorded in her tablet, "The sky no longer holds the weight it once did, and indeed, the firmament, the great dome of heaven, seemed less anchored, less bound to the world below." A profound stillness filled the night, not empty, but open, a waiting stillness, a transitional stillness, the stillness of heaven preparing itself for a new order. Lucine's fourth dream, the light that rises. Lucine's dreams, already vivid and prophetic, grew even clearer as the divine presence continued its gentle retreat. On a particularly quiet night, when the moon hung low like a silver tear in the darkened sky, Lucine entered a dream that felt more real than the waking world. He found himself standing in a vast field beneath a pale sky that shimmered with threads of gold. In the distance, a column of radiant light rose slowly upward, not like smoke nor like fire, but like the soft glow of countless stars lifting as one. Within this rising light were familiar forms, tall, graceful, divine. The Anunnaki. They were ascending, their silhouettes glowing with the soft warmth of beings returning home after a long journey. Lucine felt no fear, only a profound tenderness as he watched them rise. One figure turned toward him and extended a hand that shimmered with compassion. And then the light rose higher, slowly dissolving into the sky. When Lucine awoke, he felt as though a piece of heaven had brushed his heart before drifting away. The gods themselves observed the thinning veil. In the luminous realm where the Anunnaki now gathered, a subtle shift was unfolding around them. The veil that once bound them firmly to the world below grew thinner, more transparent, more fragile. They could feel the earthly realm receding, not pushed away, but drifting gently as if carried by the currents of time. Enki nodded with calm acceptance. This is the way of every creation. The beginning is shared. And Ninhursag, who held the gentleness of mountains and rivers in her spirit, added softly, "They will." The gods stood together, feeling the veil thin like morning mist, feeling the world below slip softly toward its own destiny. The lifting of divine light was nearly complete. The slow dawn of human independence. As the divine presence lifted, human hearts began to fill with something new, something subtle and barely understood. A sense of standing alone, a sense of walking into a future not written by gods, but shaped by human hands. It was frightening, it was freeing, it was unknown, it was beautiful. The dawn of human independence was beginning, though few recognized it. For the first time in ages, the story of humankind was preparing to move forward on its own feet. And though the path ahead would be long, filled with struggle, filled with triumph, filled with searching, it would be their path, not guided, not controlled, not dictated. A path lit by the soft memory of gods who once walked beside them. As the divine light continued its graceful ascent from the earthly realm, the bond between gods and mortals, a bond older than writing, older than kings, older even than the first whisper of civilization, began to loosen in ways so subtle and tender that only those who listened deeply could sense the shift. It was not a sudden unraveling, nor a harsh severing of sacred threads, but rather a soft unwinding, a slow easing of the connection that had once tethered heaven to earth like a luminous cord woven from starlight, devotion, and shared destiny. This bond had guided humankind through ages of wonder and uncertainty, lifting them from the dust of creation, teaching them order, shaping their laws, and offering truths in symbols carved on clay and whispered in dreams. But now, as the Anunnaki stepped steadily toward a horizon beyond mortal sight, the bond that had once been vibrant and warm felt thinner, like a final strand of light glowing softly before fading gently into the embrace of dawn. The rituals lose their echo. In temple after temple across Sumer, ritual chants that once resonated with powerful echoes now returned only soft reflections of human voices. The gods still listened, but the space between worlds was widening, like two drifting islands pulling slowly apart across a quiet sea. In Uruk, the priestesses gathered during the pre-dawn hour, when the veil was believed to be thinnest. They performed the ancient hymn of Inanna's rising, their voices layered with devotion and longing. But the radiant echo, that familiar soft vibration that once pressed gently through the air like a breath from the heavens, was faint, barely there, almost imagined. The high priestess continued the chant, even as tears welled in her eyes, not because she felt forsaken, but because she felt honored to sing during the final days of a divine era. Her words drifted into the soft shadows like feathers carried by a slow wind. The breath of the storm grows thin. In Nippur, Enlil's priests marched in a procession across the upper terrace of the great ziggurat, lifting their ceremonial staffs toward the open sky. In ages past, these rituals would stir the winds into swirling dances, gusts that carried the unmistakable stamp of the Storm Lord's presence. But this time the winds barely stirred. A few gentle currents brushed their robes, soft and warm, like a farewell caress rather than a divine summons. And indeed, what once had been a living dialogue between earth and sky had become a quiet echo, the after-image of a bond slowly dissolving into the larger flow of cosmic destiny. The sacred statues grow colder. In cities like Ur, Lagash, and Kish, priests noticed that the sacred statues representing the gods felt colder to the touch. In earlier times, these statues were believed to carry small traces of divine presence, a warmth beneath the stone, a subtle vibration, a gentle hum. But now, as fingers brushed their surfaces, a chill lingered there, not harsh, but unmistakable. The chill of absence beginning to take form. One young priestess in Ur rested her forehead against the statue of Nana, the moon god, and whispered, "Your light guided my childhood." The statue remained silent, still, cold. But the priestess felt a strange peace, as though the silence itself was a gentle acknowledgment from the departing god. Lucin receives the faintest whisper. In Eridu, Lucin's dreams continued, but now they carried a more distant quality, as though the divine realm was moving upward, further and further, with each passing night. One dream came to him as he drifted between waking and sleep, a luminous moment where he felt himself suspended between two worlds. He saw a staircase made of pale, shimmering stone rising into the sky like a path carved from moonlight. At the top of this staircase stood the faint outline of a familiar figure, the same radiant being who had appeared in earlier dreams. But now the figure's glow was softer, further away, and its voice reached Lucin as little more than a sigh carried across a vast canyon. Then the vision dissolved, carrying with it a gentle ache that settled in Lucin's chest like a memory he was afraid to lose. The oracle interprets the waning. The oracle of Eridu listened as Lucin described his newest dream, her eyes half closed as though she were gazing at something beyond the walls around them. The oracle reached out and touched the clay tablet he held in trembling hands. "No," she whispered. "Bonds forged in creation never break." She looked toward the sacred pool, its still surface glowing faintly. The bond becomes memory. Memory becomes myth. Her words flowed with the serene confidence of someone who understood that endings were not truly endings, only shifts in the shape of connection. The people grow quieter, and yet wiser. As the divine presence faded, something unexpected began to unfold among the people of Sumer. They grew quieter in their daily movements, speaking with softer voices, listening more carefully to one another and to the world around them. Parents noticed that their children asked deeper questions. Questions about existence, about purpose, about the meaning hidden within the spaces between words. Farmers felt a sharpened intuition about the soil and sky, as if the gradual withdrawal of divine guidance was awakening something older and more instinctive within them. Artisans, priests, scribes, and common folk all began to display a curious transformation, a growing awareness, a growing independence, a growing ability to interpret the world without waiting for divine instruction. It was subtle but profound, the first breath of a humanity learning to stand without leaning on the supporting hand of its creators. In the heavens, the gods feel the bond stretch. In the celestial realm, the Anunnaki gathered once more as the bond that tied them to the earthly world grew thin, like a thread pulled through the eye of a needle. Inanna closed her eyes, her aura dimming to a soft rose-gold shimmer. Enlil looked downward with a heaviness that trembled briefly within his presence, and Ninhursag, ever the mother of life, answered gently, "Understanding is not required for growth." The gods fell silent, feeling the bond stretch into something delicate and ghost-like, still present, still sacred, but no longer strong enough to hold two worlds together. The waning of the celestial bond reaches the land. And so, as the divine presence continued to rise, the bond between gods and mortals became a soft thread of light. Thin, fragile, beautiful. Rituals continued, but now they felt like tributes to a memory rather than dialogue with living gods. Dreams came, but with voices more distant each night. Signs appeared, but their meanings were less clear, less immediate, less anchored to the earthly world. The gods were becoming figures of the horizon, seen only in the soft glow that lingers after sunset, felt only in the whisper that remains after a long embrace. Heaven's light was lifting, the celestial bond was waning, and the age of the Anunnaki, once vast, vibrant, and intertwined with every breath of early humanity, was now approaching its final, gentle dusk. There comes a moment in the life of a world when the boundary between what is seen and what is merely felt begins to shimmer with a soft and otherworldly glow. A moment when the veil that separates realms grows so thin that even the gentlest shift in divine presence ripples through the mortal heart with the unmistakable touch of destiny. As the Anunnaki's presence continued its peaceful withdrawal from the physical world, that delicate veil, once radiant with the shared breath of gods and humankind, began to stretch into something almost translucent, almost weightless, like the last wisp of incense rising in a quiet temple before dissolving entirely into air. This thinning of the veil did not frighten the land of Sumer, nor did it bring omens of calamity. Instead, it brought a profound stillness and a heightened sense of awareness, as if the world itself held its breath in reverence for the approaching end of an ancient and sacred chapter. Shifting light over the temples. In the earliest hours of dawn, when the horizon glowed with only a hint of gold, the temples across Sumer began to exhibit strange and gentle changes that the priests struggled to understand. Light moved differently, not brighter, not darker, just different. It fell across the stone floors in elongated shapes, as though the sun were shining from a slightly altered angle, as though the heavens themselves had turned by a fraction now that the gods were withdrawing. In the temple of Inanna, the priestesses watched as the morning light passed through the entrance with a softness that made the air seem thicker, more luminous, as if infused with a final blessing that shimmered quietly before fading. One priestess, a young woman named Ilani, stood beside a column and ran her hand along its warm surface. She felt a slight trembling under her palm. So faint she thought at first it was merely her own heartbeat, but then she realized it came from the stone itself. The temple, ancient and wise, was reacting to the thinning veil. She closed her eyes, resting her forehead against the column. The silence that followed felt full of presence, full of memory, full of grace. The sacred pool reflects a new reality. In Eridu, the sacred pool of Enki became more still than any water should ever be. It no longer moved with the subtle ripples that accompany life. It lay perfectly flat, so unmoving that even the slightest touch caused ripples that looked foreign, unnatural, as though motion had become a strange and unfamiliar intrusion. The chief priest sat beside the pool, his robes gathered around him like folds of soft twilight. He dipped his fingers into the water, and the ripples that formed stretched slowly across the surface, as though unsure how quickly to travel, as though the laws of this world were beginning to shift as the divine presence receded. The priest inhaled deeply, letting the faint scent of damp stone and ancient ritual fill his lungs. The surface of the pool glimmered faintly beneath the morning light. A shimmer that lasted one heartbeat longer than a normal reflection should. It was a reply, not a voice, not a sound, but a shimmer, a final message from a god gently releasing his hold upon the earthly realm. Healers feel the shift in life's breath. Across various cities, healers who served in temples dedicated to Ninhursag noticed subtle changes in the rhythm of life itself. Herbs that normally thrived under her divine influence now grew with gentler, slower energy. Not weaker, just softer. When healers placed their hands upon the sick or injured, they no longer felt the strong rush of divine warmth flowing through their palms. Instead, they felt a faint lingering energy, as delicate as a fading heartbeat, as though Ninhursag were offering her final guidance before stepping beyond the reach of human touch. One healer, an elderly woman named Namu, knelt beside a young boy recovering from illness. As she placed her hands upon his forehead, she felt the faint pulse of life energy shift under her touch, a shift that told her the goddess's presence was now more of a memory than an active force. The boy's breathing steadied, and though she felt no divine surge, she knew the healing was taking place through the strength of humanity itself. Ninhursag had prepared them for this moment long before they realized they would face it. Animals sense a passage. Opening. Throughout Sumer, animals began reacting to the thinning veil in ways humans found curious, beautiful, and at times unsettling. Cattle stood still for long stretches of time facing the sunrise, as though watching an invisible procession. Dogs whined softly in the evenings, not in fear, but in a strange longing, their eyes fixed on empty corners of courtyards where gods once walked unseen by human perception. Birds took flight in slow, spiraling formations that resembled ancient symbols carved into temple walls, signs believed to represent paths to the heavens. One shepherd near Umma watched in awe as his flock of sheep formed a gentle crescent shape across the hillside at dusk, a formation they had never displayed before. It was as though all creatures on earth felt the veil thinning, felt the divine presence drifting upward, felt the changing tides of an age approaching its quiet close. But his voice held no fear, only quiet reverence for the sacredness of what he was witnessing. Luzin's fifth dream. The veil becomes light. Luzin's sleep grew deeper and more fragile as the veil thinned. On the night of his fifth dream, he felt himself lifted gently out of his body, as though a warm, unseen hand had wrapped around his spirit and guided him into a luminous realm between waking and dreaming. He found himself standing before a vast curtain of shimmering silver light. It was neither solid nor transparent. It flickered softly like moonlight caught on the surface of the sea. He reached out and touched the veil. It felt warm, warm with the presence of something ancient, something loving, something saying farewell. On the other side of the glowing curtain, he saw silhouettes, tall, radiant, familiar. The Anunnaki. They moved slowly, gracefully, as though preparing for a journey, neither hurried nor delayed. One figure stepped closer, and for a moment Lucin could sense the immense compassion emanating from it. And then, like a breath, the light folded inward and dissolved. Lucin woke with a trembling exhale, feeling the memory of the light still resting on his skin. The gods observed the veil's final softness. In the celestial realm, the Anunnaki gathered upon a vast terrace of light that overlooked both their world and the mortal world below. The veil shimmered between them, thin, wavering, almost ready to dissolve. Enki nodded slowly. Enlil looked at the thinning veil, his expression filled with a mixture of longing and acceptance. The gods stood together in silence, watching the veil thin like early morning fog. They knew that the next stage of their departure was near, very near. The world braces for the next shift. As the veil between worlds thinned to a delicate shimmer, the people of Sumer felt a quiet anticipation they could not explain. It was not fear, it was not sorrow, it was not confusion. It was a sense that something profound, something sacred, was unfolding just beyond the edge of human comprehension. Even the air felt different, charged with a gentle energy that brushed the skin like a warm breeze from another world. The temples grew quieter, the fields grew still. The night sky glowed with soft, shifting hues. All of Sumer felt suspended between two ages. The end of the Anunnaki Age was no longer distant, no longer theoretical, no longer sensed only by priests and dreamers, and those who listened deeply. It was here, approaching softly, unfolding like the petals of a sacred flower opening for the final time. The veil between worlds was almost gone, and the next phase of the gods' departure was about to begin. As the veil between realms thinned to a mere breath of light, the separation that had been unfolding softly for moons began to cast its first true shadows across the land. Shadows not of darkness or fear, but of gentle transition, like the lengthening dusk that appears when the sun prepares to rest beneath the horizon. These shadows were subtle, woven from changes so delicate that the ordinary eye could easily pass them by. But to the hearts attuned to the rhythms of the divine, to the priests, the dreamers, the elders, and even the attentive children, These shifts felt as unmistakable as the slow turning of an age. The first shadows of departure were not frightening silhouettes, but soft impressions, echoes of footsteps taken by gods walking toward the edge of the world's last shared dawn. An unusual stillness settles upon Uruk. In Uruk, the sacred city that had long pulsed with the vibrant energy of Inanna's presence, a strange stillness settled upon the streets during the early hours of morning. It was not the stillness of emptiness, but rather a deep, contemplative quiet in which even the bustling market vendors lowered their voices, as though instinctively aware that something sacred was taking place just beyond the reach of mortal perception. The wind moved gently, too gently, brushing through the city with the faint aroma of blooming date palms, yet carrying none of the warmth that usually accompanied dawn breezes. The high priestess stepped onto the upper terrace of Inanna's temple and looked out over her city. What she saw made her inhale softly. The shadows cast by buildings were longer than they should have been, even though the sun was not yet fully risen. The shadows stretched far, far across the courtyard, as if the light were bending in unusual patterns while adjusting to a world from which the gods were slowly receding. The words drifted away into the silent air, carried upward like a final offering to a goddess stepping softly beyond mortal reach. The cities begin to glow. At twilight. Across Sumer, several witnesses began reporting an unusual phenomenon, a faint glow visible above the cities at twilight. It was not the glow of fire, nor of lamps, nor of celestial bodies. It was something entirely different. A soft, shimmering radiance rose just above rooftops, like a delicate haze, subtle enough to miss if one blinked too slowly, yet unmistakable to those who paused to observe. In Lagash, a potter's son pointed upward as his family gathered for the evening meal. "Look," he whispered, his small voice trembling not with fear, but with awe. Above the city, the faint glow shimmered in shades of gold and pale silver, almost like the after-image of beings made of light passing through unseen pathways. His mother rested a gentle hand on his shoulder. "It is only the twilight," she assured him, though her voice wavered, for she too sensed that this was not an ordinary twilight. This shimmer was the lingering trace of divine presence lifting higher each day, a final glow left behind by gods preparing for their ultimate ascent. In Nippur, the winds pause entirely. The most profound sign of the gods' approaching departure appeared in Nippur, the spiritual heart of Sumer. For one full day and night, the winds ceased entirely. Not a single breeze moved across the city. The high terraces, accustomed to constant gusts from Enlil's realm, felt unnervingly still. The cloaks of priests lay flat against their bodies, torches remained upright, their flames motionless as if frozen in time. A young priest named Etana stood at the top of the ziggurat with both palms turned upward, searching for the familiar pressure of wind that had accompanied every ritual all his life. But there was none. Only silence, vast, deep, and strangely serene. It was as though Enlil himself had paused mid-breath, holding still in preparation for the next step of his departure. The silence did not reply, yet the stillness held a profound meaning, a sign that the bond between sky and earth was being gently unwoven. A thin line of light appears at dawn. For several days, people in different regions reported seeing a thin, vertical line of pale light on the horizon at dawn. It was not the sun. It was not a star. It was not a reflection. It was something else, something none could name. In the city of Ur, a caravan master returning from distant lands stood beside his camels as the glowing line appeared. His breath stilled in his chest. The line of light rose slightly, elongated, then dissolved as the sun climbed the sky. He knelt in the sand and whispered, "I have traveled far and seen wonders, but never this." Others reported the same vision. Priests debated its meaning. Astronomers recorded it carefully. Children pointed to it in wonder. But the truth of it, felt in the hearts of those most attuned, was this: the gods were marking the first visible pathway of their ascent. The oracle foreshadows the coming change. In Eridu, the oracle awoke before dawn with a tremor in her spirit that she had not felt in decades. She sat upright in her chambers, breathing slowly as the remnants of a vision clung to her consciousness like threads of fading moonlight. She called for Lucen. When he arrived, she studied his face, the scribe chosen by dreams, the witness chosen by destiny. Lucen bowed his head, his heart already weighted by the dreams that haunted him. He asked softly. The oracle closed her eyes, her lashes trembling slightly. It means the gods have begun the part of their journey where they no longer walk within the edges of our sight. Lucen's fingers shook as he gripped his tablet. He whispered. She opened her eyes and gazed at him with gentle certainty. Record how the world reacts. Record how the shadows stretch. Record how the air changes. Lucen's sixth dream, the shadowed horizon. That very night, as if in response to the oracle's words, Lucen entered another dream, one more vivid, more solemn, and more expansive than those before. He stood on a shoreline where the sea was calm and the horizon shimmered with shifting hues of gold and gray. The horizon was moving. It stretched upward like a dark, gentle curvature, a shadow that rose slowly as if lifted by unseen hands. Within this shadow, Lucen sensed presence, not frightening, but vast and ancient. A whisper reached him, carried on a distant wind that did not touch his skin. Do not fear the shadow when it falls. Then the horizon folded, like a curtain drawn back, revealing a brief glimpse of a luminous expanse beyond human imagination. Before he could comprehend it, the dream dissolved into silence. He woke with tears sliding down his cheeks, feeling both the sorrow of separation and the awe of witnessing something sacred stepping beyond mortal reach. The people begin to sense the farewell. Across Sumer, in cities and villages alike, ordinary people who knew nothing of councils of gods or thinning veils or prophetic dreams began to feel a quiet emotion they could not name, a tenderness in the morning air, a heaviness in the twilight breeze, a strange calm that wrapped itself around daily life like a comforting cloak. People paused in the middle of tasks and glanced upward without knowing why. Mothers held their children a little tighter. Elders gazed at the sky with distant, reflective eyes. Travelers felt an ache when they approached city walls, as though they were returning to something already becoming memory. It was the emotional resonance of a world preparing to say farewell to the beings who had shaped it. Not farewell with grief, not farewell with fear, farewell with love, deep, ancient love that carried the weight of millennia. The gods observed the first darkness of departure. In the celestial realm, the Anunnaki stood together upon a vast plain of light, watching the shadow that now spread softly across the mortal world. It was not a shadow of darkness, but of transition, the first sign that the bridge between realms was beginning to withdraw. Enlil, who had struggled most with the idea of departure, closed his eyes. The gods stood in silence, witnessing the beginning of their own departure reflected gently upon the world below. The first shadows had fallen, and the next stage of their departure, deeper, wider, inevitable, was quietly approaching. There are moments in a world's life when the paths once walked by divine feet begin to lose their brilliance, when the traces of ancient radiance that once glowed upon stone and soil begin to fade gently, as though the world is slowly exhaling the last remnants of a shared breath between gods and mortals. And in Sumer, a land shaped by rivers, guided by starlight, and nurtured by the hands of the Anunnaki, those sacred pathways began to dim in ways so soft and subtle that only the most sensitive souls noticed the change. These pathways, woven through temples, hillsides, and marshlands, had once shimmered faintly at dusk, a sign that the divine had passed through, leaving traces of cosmic resonance embedded within the very foundation of the mortal world. But now, as the Anunnaki continued their gentle yet inevitable ascent toward realms beyond reach, the sacred pathways glowed less brightly each night, their faint luminescence softening into something quieter, more fragile, as though preparing to disappear entirely. The ancient pathway of Uruk fades. First in Uruk, where Inanna's presence had once pulsed with vibrant power, the sacred walkway that led from the temple courtyard to the inner sanctum had always held a subtle glow, a shimmering line of light visible only to those whose devotion allowed their eyes to see beyond the physical. Priestesses used to describe this glow as the footsteps of the morning star, a poetic reminder that Inanna moved among them, guiding their rituals with her luminous grace. But over the span of several nights, the glow began to weaken, not in sudden extinguishing, not in abrupt darkness, but in a slow dimming, like a candle burning its final centimeters of wax, still warm, still alive, but unmistakably nearing the moment of its last flicker. One evening, the high priestess walked the sacred path alone, her sandals brushing softly against the smooth stone. She stopped halfway and knelt reverently, touching the pathway with her fingertips. The stone felt colder than she remembered, and the faint glimmer of light that had guided her for decades seemed almost like a dream fading from memory. And as she spoke, the glow shimmered briefly, a final acknowledgement, before settling into a dimness that signaled the goddess's withdrawal. The path of Nippur becomes silent. In Nippur, the sacred pathway leading to Enlil's high altar had always echoed faintly beneath the feet of priests. This echo was not of sound, but of presence, a subtle vibration that came from the air itself each time a ritual procession passed. But recently, the echo had vanished. The pathway now felt as silent as untouched earth, as though the resonance that once filled it had been drawn away by the god of wind and authority as he stepped further from the mortal world. On the night when the echo finally ceased, the elder priest who had served Enlil for more than half his life walked the pathway alone. With each step, he listened, for the faint tremor of divine breath, for the soft hum of Enlil's unseen presence. But there was nothing. The silence felt vast and hollow, yet not frightening, as though the pathway was honoring the god by gently letting go of the energy he once infused within it. At the end of the path, the priest knelt and placed both palms flat against the stone. The silence did not change. The silence was the answer. The marsh pathways of Eridu grow. Still in Eridu, the oldest city, the cradle of humanity's earliest memory, the sacred pathways extended beyond temple walls into the marshlands. These marsh pathways, threading through reeds and water, had always shimmered faintly beneath the moonlight as though touched by Enki's own hand. Fishermen who traveled them often said that the water glowed when the god watched over their journey, and indeed, for generations they had trusted this glow as a sign of divine protection. But now, the light that danced upon the marsh waterways began to dim. Fishermen noticed it first, how their boats slid quietly through darker waters, how the subtle luminescence that once surrounded them had thinned to almost nothing. One elder fisherman, a man who had grown old navigating these divine channels, stood upon the bow of his boat at dusk and watched the faint glow disappear. He felt tears gather at the corners of his eyes as he whispered, "You guided us even when we did not know we were lost." His words drifted across the darkening water, merging with the last traces of Enki's presence. The children of Sumer. Sense the change. First, as the sacred pathways dimmed, children across Sumer were the first to feel the emotional shift. Children whose spirits remained closest to the purity of creation often sensed truths that adults overlooked. Others wondered why the pathways they used to play near no longer shimmered at dusk. Her mother, stunned by the poetic clarity of the child's words, could only kneel beside her and hold her close. Children, in their innocent brilliance, did not fear the fading light. To them, it was simply the world changing, like the seasons, like the tides, like the passing of day into night. They accepted what adults struggled to understand. Lucian's seventh dream, the pathways disconnect. When the seventh dream came to Lucian, it arrived with a clarity that left him breathless. He saw the sacred pathways from above, long lines of light stretching across the cities, the marshlands, the mountains, connecting humanity to the presence of the gods. These pathways glowed softly, but their radiance was fractured, as though each line was losing its grip on the world below. He watched as one pathway, bright and shimmering, slowly lifted from the ground, rising gently into the sky like a ribbon caught in a slow-moving wind. Then another and another. Each pathway rose upward toward a luminous expanse far beyond the clouds, an expanse where the Anunnaki waited patiently for the final alignment of their departure. A whisper drifted across the dream. The roads we forged served their purpose. Lucian reached out to grasp one of the pathways, but his hand passed through it like mist. When he awoke, he felt a deep ache, not painful, but profound, as though a piece of ancient beauty had slipped gently from the world. He wrote, "The pathways rise, and we remain." The priests gather to witness the dimming. Across Sumer, the priests of every city, every temple, every tradition began gathering in small circles to discuss the changes they could no longer deny. At twilight, they stood upon terraces and walked along the dimming pathways, their eyes wide with both sorrow and awe. They understood, with the wisdom of those trained to read the invisible, that the dimming of the pathways meant the separation was entering a deeper phase, a phase where the gods' footsteps no longer touched the earth. The gods watch as the pathways fade. In the celestial realm, the Anunnaki stood at the edge of a luminous platform overlooking the mortal world. As each sacred pathway dimmed and rose, they watched with quiet sorrow and solemn acceptance. And together, they watched the pathways dim, one by one. The world grows quiet. With the dimming of the sacred pathways, Sumer fell into a quietude that felt deeper than anything it had known before. People walked more slowly, voices softened, temples glowed faintly with the last remnants of divine presence. The world was not ending. It was transitioning, softly, gently, inevitably, into a new age where humanity would stand without the glowing paths that once guided them. The Anunnaki Age was not gone, but its pathways were taking their final breaths, and so the sacred pathways dimmed and the air grew still, and the veil between worlds thinned until it shimmered like a final thread of silver, holding two realms together for just one last heartbeat in eternity. The people of Sumer, the farmers in their fields, the mothers beside their hearths, the fishermen drifting through the marshes, the elders who had lived long enough to see many signs, all began to sense, in ways soft and subtle, that the world was preparing for a farewell unlike any other they had known. It was not a farewell of grief, nor a farewell of abandonment, nor a farewell carved from fear or sorrow, but a farewell wrapped in tenderness, the kind of farewell that comes when a guiding hand finally releases the one it has raised, trusting that they will walk forward with steps steady and true. In the temples, the lamps burned gently. In the courtyards, shadows stretched long and thin. In the cities, the stones seemed to remember the warmth of gods who had once walked beside them. And in the hearts of humankind, a quiet ache settled, a mixture of love, gratitude, and the dawning understanding that an age was closing. High above, in the radiant expanse where the Anunnaki gathered, the final preparations for departure moved into place. They stood together, their luminous forms shimmering softly with the colors of distant stars, Inanna with her rose-gold radiance, Enki with the shimmering glow of deep waters, Enlil with the quiet authority of the sky, Ninhursag with the tender light of Earth's first dawn. Before them stretched a colossal arc of light, the ancient gateway between worlds, a passage older than memory, older than starlight, older than time itself. It glowed now with the fullness of its power, awaiting the final step. Inanna gazed downward one last time, watching the gentle glow of Uruk beneath the fading twilight. Her voice drifted across the realm, soft as a sigh of wind through lotus petals. They will sing of us in the language of memory. Enki lifted his hand, and for a moment the waters of Eridu glimmered as though reflecting stars not yet born. Enlil closed his eyes, feeling the final ripple of wind across the world below. And Ninhursag, with a voice that carried the warmth of creation itself, spoke the final blessing. They were shaped by our hands, but they will grow by their own. The gods turned toward the gateway. The veils shimmered. The pathways dimmed. The last threads of light that connected heaven and earth loosened gently, like a final breath released after a long and tender embrace. And then, with movements slow and filled with infinite grace, the Anunnaki stepped forward, passing through the luminous arc that led beyond the world they once shaped. There was no thunder, no quake, no cry of anguish, only light, soft, endless light that folded around them like the closing pages of an ancient sacred book. As the last of their radiance disappeared into the cosmic horizon, a wave of warm, quiet stillness washed across the earth. Lucine, awake before dawn, felt it first. He stepped out of his chamber, looked toward the horizon, and saw nothing unusual. No comet, no star breaking, no heavenly sign. Only a silent sky beginning to soften with the early colors of morning. And yet, within that silence, he felt it. The ending, the completion, the closing of an age that had stretched across centuries, carrying humanity from the clay of creation into the dawn of its own destiny. He lifted his stylus and wrote the final words on the tablet before him. They have gone beyond the reach of our eyes, but not beyond memory. Their age has ended, and ours begins. The sun rose, the shadows shifted. The world stood quiet as the first day of the new age began. The age of the Anunnaki had ended, not with darkness, but with light, not with sorrow, but with peace, not with abandonment, but with trust. And humanity, now standing upon the threshold of its own story, took its first breath in a world where the gods had stepped away, leaving behind not emptiness, but the vast and beautiful space for humankind to rise. There comes a time after all endings when the world grows quiet enough to hear what remains, the faint echoes, the lingering warmth, the invisible threads of meaning that continue to weave themselves through the lives of those left behind. And so, it was in the days following the departure of the Anunnaki. The heavens no longer shimmered with the gentle glow of departing gods. The sacred pathways were dark and silent. The temples stood like great monuments to an age that had quietly closed its final chapter. Yet the land of Sumer did not fall into despair, nor did its people collapse beneath the weight of a world suddenly emptied of divine presence. Instead, something remarkable began to unfold, something subtle and profoundly human. The quiet healing of the world. In the days that followed, a tender quiet settled across the valleys and rivers. The air grew warm with the scent of ripening fields. Birds sang with renewed softness. Waters flowed with gentle clarity, as if the earth itself was exhaling a long sigh that had been held for generations. It was as though the world, newly freed from the direct weight of divine influence, was beginning to find its own natural rhythm. A rhythm shaped not by the footsteps of gods, but by the heartbeat of life itself. Trees seemed to sway with a softer grace. The marshlands of Eridu ripened with quiet abundance. The winds of Nippur returned, not carrying the authority of Enlil, but carrying the simple breath of the sky. The world was healing, not from harm, but into independence. The people learned to listen in new ways. In the absence of divine voices, the people of Sumer began to discover new ways of listening, ways that did not require the presence of gods, but instead drew from the wisdom within themselves. A young shepherd in Lagash found that he could read the movement of clouds with surprising clarity, predicting the weather with a talent he never knew he had. A potter in Ur began shaping clay with such precision and artistry that others claimed his hands moved as though guided by invisible memory. A group of priestesses in Uruk found themselves writing new hymns, not to call forth the goddess, but to honor the beauty of the world left in her wake. It was as if the knowledge once bestowed by the gods had not vanished with their departure, but had scattered gently into the hearts of those who remained. The people were not abandoned. They were awakening. The temples become places of reflection. The grand temples, once filled with divine energy, took on a new purpose. No longer were they spaces where gods descended or spoke through sacred echoes. They became places where humanity ascended, through thought, through prayer, through the searching of the soul. Priests and priestesses gathered in smaller circles, speaking not of omens but of wisdom, not of prophecy but of understanding. The high priestess of Uruk stood before her congregation and spoke words that drifted through the air like falling petals. The gods walked with us in our beginning. The temple walls seemed to absorb the words as though they too found peace in this new understanding. Lucine writes the final tablet. Lucine, who had witnessed the dreams of departure, felt the gentle pull of destiny one last time. He sat beneath the shade of the olive tree where he had recorded so many visions, the clay tablet resting on his knees, the stylus warm between his fingers. This final tablet would not recount dreams or describe shadows or chronicle signs in the heavens. It would record what remained. He wrote slowly, each word carrying the weight of an age. The gods have passed beyond our sight, but their essence flows through the rivers and the breath and the living memory of our world. When he finished, he placed the tablet among the others, a complete archive of the final days of the Anunnaki Age. And in the stillness, he felt something, not a voice, not a presence, but a soft warmth in his chest, a final blessing, a farewell fully given and fully received. The last glimmer in the sky. On a night when the sky was clear and the moon hung low like a cradle of silver light, a faint shimmer appeared far above Sumer. People emerged from their homes, their gazes drawn upward as though called by an invisible thread. The shimmer expanded slowly, taking the shape of a single graceful arc, the barest outline of the gateway through which the gods had passed. It glowed for only moments, lighting the night sky with a soft radiance that felt like peace itself. And then, with the gentlest flicker, it dissolved, not like something ending, but like something finally at rest. A collective breath rose from the people of Sumer, not sorrow, not longing, peace, deep, abiding peace, the dawn of human destiny. When morning came, the world felt different, not heavier, but fuller, as though the absence of the gods had created space for something new to bloom. People stepped into the day with quiet confidence, their shadows falling long before them as if guiding their path. They no longer looked to the heavens for instruction. They looked to one another, to the earth beneath their feet, to the stories carved into their hearts by generations past. The world belonged to them now, not as a burden, but as a gift. A new age dawned, carried not by divine hands, but by human ones, strong, imperfect, hopeful, and ready. The final breath of the age. And so the Anunnaki Age ended not with thunder, nor flame, nor cosmic upheaval, but with silence, sacred, gentle, transformative. The gods departed, yet remained in memory, in story, in the pulse of the world they shaped. Their footsteps faded, but humanity's footsteps grew stronger. Their voices quieted, but humanity's voices rose in their place. And the world, newly awakened, moved forward into an age where destiny belonged not to the heavens, but to humankind. The end was not an ending. It was a beginning written by those left behind, children of Earth, carriers of memory, and the new makers of history.